Hello, everyone. I'm joined by Dana today, who is a freelance writer and consultant for B2B SaaS with a lot of experience, over 8 years. And she worked with some of the best companies, SaaS companies out there like ConvertKit, Hotjar, and Semrush. Welcome, Dana. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk with everyone today and kind of share a bunch of tips and
Nice. The topic Dana chose, is how to write a high-performing blog article from start to finish, which I thought is a topic that's always current, because best practices change, especially in kind of this period of time. And everyone wants to be up to date with the latest trends and tactics for writing a high-performing blog article. So that's why I thought it would be a good idea to ask someone like Dana, who is doing it on a day-to-day basis, has a lot of experience, and is working with the best people out there, best companies out there, to show us how she does it today, how she writes a high-performing blog article in June 2024. So we can hopefully take away some tips and apply them to our own content.
Yeah, exactly.
So we can dive right in. Where should we start, Dana?
Well, let's start. I guess maybe I'll talk a little bit about what I do. So I've been involved in the writing process from briefing to writing, editing. So I've touched all different areas of the publication process. And so today I want to talk about publishing a piece from start to finish, like Christian already mentioned. And there's a lot of things that people don't maybe think about because they work with a team and their team has their set process and that's the way they do things. But there's a lot of different practices and tips that you can gain from other companies. So that's kind of what I want to pull together today is all the best strategies that I've noticed from the different companies I've worked for and the different clients that I've done work for, and kind of share all those today. So let's start with, I guess, the topic research is where you're going to start when you are picking out your topic, and you're going to write the blog post. And I guess even before that, when you're putting together the brief. So I'll talk about the brief in a bit, about all the things that you should include in your brief, whether it's you writing it or whether you're putting a brief together for a writer. Having a strong brief is just your starting point. It's basically the foundation of your blog post. And so it's really important to have a good, strong brief, something that's a few pages long. It just helps to keep everyone on the same page. Even your editors, they can reference the brief to make sure that the writer hasn't strayed off course or anything like that. But before you start the brief, you need to do some topic research. And that's kind of where you take a look at when you have your keyword, you head into the search results and you see what's missing from them. And so something that I think will be gaining a lot more popularity, because of the recent Google algorithm changes, will be something called the information gain score. And that's when Google may reward content that has information in it that other blog posts don't. And so basically what's happened over the years with Google and the problem with search engines and SEO is that every piece of content ends up being very similar. It all talks about the same things. It has the same headings. And I'm sure that's a problem that you've noticed with your own content teams, is because there's a lot of tools out there that encourage companies to produce this similar content. And it makes sense because you want your content to rank. And one way that you can get it to rank is by creating something that's similar to what's already ranking on Google and other search engines. And so now there's a lot of push for having something that's unique. And that's where Google's information gain score sort of comes in. And so there was a patent released. I'm not sure when it was released, but it talks about Google's information gain score and how it seems that Google may be rewarding content that has sort of new information or a different twist to it or something that will give the reader just something extra that they're not going to get from all the other search results, because ultimately when they can get more of what they want, then they're going to be happy with the Google as a whole. They're going to continue using Google to find what they're searching for. And so your first job, I would think, when you have your keyword, is to go and review the top 10 and take a look at what you can do to differentiate your article. And so by that, I mean, what industry experts can you bring in, and can you use their expertise? Is there any new research reports that you know of that you can include in your article? Can you conduct any research, or do you have any internal research that you can speak on with the topic? Is there any new news in the industry that you can sort of touch on and bring in and relate to your topic? Is there anything that's missing in these pieces within the top 10 search results that you can talk about, so that the reader doesn't need to click back and then adjust their search to find more information? Basically, what you want to ask yourself is, how can we cover this topic the best, and what can we include that the others don't? And so, Christian,
So
I don't
this
know if
is
you have any questions.
just
Yeah,
a
go ahead.
question on this. So this is different from the idea of skyscraper content, right? It's a
Yeah,
different
yeah,
approach.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You still want to contain all the essential information in your piece, but essentially you want to go beyond that and think like, what else? What else is there? What new information can I include? Yeah.
So it's not the skyscraper philosophy was you make the most comprehensive piece out there that contains everything the others have. And the idea is some of them will be missing what you have, and therefore you will be ranking higher. It's not about creating the most comprehensive piece of content. It's about creating, let's say, unique, original piece of content.
Yeah, yeah. I think kind of blending that unique and also relevant, because sometimes the skyscraper technique might persuade writers to include info, like they just want to include all the information. And you also have to ask yourself, well, is this relevant to the reader in their journey, in their buyer's journey, or am I just including that because I'm trying to follow the skyscraper technique? And so, yeah, blending originality with relevancy and just trying to create the best piece. It's easier said than done, but that's the first step. So, trying to come up with a unique angle and something that you can include that's unique. Yeah.
Um, do we speak later about um, ways to do research or to recruit subject matter expertise through
We
channels
do
to
on
use?
I do, let me see. I'm pretty sure I did. For SMEs, yeah, I have a little bit here about how to recruit SMEs and what tools you can use, and yeah, just different ways for that.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe also there or here, I don't know. I'm curious to hear about this research part. Yeah, if what methods you use, and if what's more effective between these methods in creating kind of unique content. You're recruiting subject matter expertise or doing research, and when you choose one over the other. I'd be curious to hear a little bit more on this.
Yeah, let's talk about that right now. So I think the important part is, if you're hiring writers, to really find writers that are familiar with your niche, because they will be able to sort of identify trends themselves, especially if they're in that niche every day. Whereas if you find a more generalized writer, it might be harder for them to pick up on smaller subtleties or trends that are going on, or people that they might know that can contribute, because they're sort of dabbling in a bunch of different niches. And I think that would be more challenging for a more generalist writer. And so if you're writing the piece, again, it's just important to be familiar with your industry, because you're going to be able to pick up on something that sticks out, something that could be missing, because you're familiar with that industry news. So if you're struggling with trying to identify trends, try to find maybe a newsletter or a blog or website that's in your space that sort of talks about the different trends that are happening, or the new information that's coming out. Just something that you can try and stay up to date, because it'll make it a lot easier to identify um, what information you can add to your content that maybe is going to be different from the other pieces. and just trying to stay as up to date as possible. And then again, if you're hiring writers and they're in that space, they usually know who the thought leaders are and who they can reach out to for quotes. And also leveraging your internal team members. So if you have a team with different experts, which most teams do, leveraging their insight in your content, because those are people that won't be able to, like your competitors won't be able to access them. And so that can be a good source of information too, is just talking with people on your team in different areas.
Yeah, I like the just a comment on this idea of speaking with the internal team. I like it more than it seems to be. You can create a you can rely more on it if it's made into a sort of process, and everyone has buy-in, and you can actually have access to the internal subject matter experts on, every time you write a piece of content. So it might be more reliable, and from my experience, than reaching out to external subject matter experts, because those you might only have a one-off, because they just want one link once, so you only get one quote from them. Yeah.
Also, on that note, for internal subject matter experts, or just subject matter experts in general, but I've specifically found this helpful, this tool for internal ones. It's called Leaps. Leapshq.com is their website. It's a great tool to track your requests, I guess. So you can just send your questions to your internal team members, and then it will send reminders. You can set how often to send reminders, because as we know, teams are busy. And so you'll send your first request and then they might not get to it right away. So it can send reminders. And then it just tracks all of your requests for your one specific piece right in the tool. So it makes the whole process very seamless. I've done both, where I've had to work with internal teams and do their internal SME myself, and it can get a bit chaotic, but with this tool, it's just all nice and streamlined. So that can be great if you have a large organization and you're trying to streamline your process for internal SME.
And maybe I forgot my question, but I was going to ask something along the lines of, between external SMEs and internal SMEs, who do you prefer, and maybe what are the benefits and disadvantages to each?
I think with external SMEs, you can cast a wider net. So if you use a website like Haro, which is now, I think, Connectively, they changed their name, or if you go on Twitter, or however you're collecting your insight, you can cast a very wide net and get hundreds of responses. And so you can kind of find a lot of SME to pull from. The downside is that now with Chat GTP and AI is that you don't always know if you're getting a response from an actual human or if this person is just sending a blast out to everyone. You also don't know if their response is unique to you and your company, or if they're sending the same kind of cookie cutter response to everyone. And so that's kind of the downside. But you can also get some really great SME that way. Like you can get respected thought leaders that are going to provide sort of an outside perspective and an unbiased perspective. Whereas if you're leaning on internal SME for all of your insight, your reader might see it as slightly biased depending on what the topic is. But then also with your internal SME, it's your competitors can't necessarily copy that, because they can't get the same voices and the same names speaking in your pieces. And so I think it's good just to strike a balance, see what works best for you, and see what your readers tend to like too. They might prefer to have internal SME and get that insight from your team.
Very cool. Very interesting. We deviated a little bit.
That's okay. Yeah. So we were talking about the topic research, which we kind of concluded, basically just trying to figure out what angle you should take with your content. And so afterwards, I guess the next step would be to understand your audience. That's also a very important part of your brief. And so if you're working with writers, I really recommend teams to put together sort of an ICP or an SAM document that talks about their market, their serviceable addressable market, so that your writers know exactly who they're speaking to in your piece. It's not really enough to say that you're talking to small business owners and leaving it at that. As a writer, that's not entirely helpful for me. And I think that you should sort of have a document that outlines who you're talking to, what their pain points are, what they are struggling with, what they want to achieve, even just some high level information that you can include in your brief. And that will also help you come up with your angle for your piece. Because if someone's searching for how to start a business, that's going to be a very different article depending if you're writing for freelancers or someone who maybe wants to start a solopreneur type of business, as opposed to someone who wants to start a business that has a staff of 50 people. Those are going to be two very different articles. So knowing who your persona is will really help you sort of form the direction of your article as well. So this is just kind of stuff that you want to do before you even begin to put together your brief, because you'll know what angle you want to take.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and really is at the core of any marketing output.
Yeah.
Not just content writing. I really like that.
Yeah. One other thing too to sort of add on to that is, on top of including who you're writing it for, including the buyer's stage that they're in and their familiarity with your company. So are they just starting out their buyer's journey? Are they familiar with your brand and they're potentially thinking of trying out your service or your product? Including that little bit of information there too can really shape the narrative of your piece and help a writer understand what types of information they need to include. So do they need to introduce your company straight, as if they're writing to someone who doesn't know who the company is, or can they kind of start in the middle and talk about your company as if it's someone who knows who you are? So that little bit of information too is helpful to have before you put together pieces.
Do you find it difficult to have access to all of this information?
Yeah, I do. I have a few companies or a few clients that have all of it together, which is really nice. And then there's others that they have a little bit, but they don't have like a formal document. I think it's really important to put together a formal document that you can share with your writers. And your writers should be signing NDAs anyways, so that information will be staying with them. It won't be going anywhere. Yeah, just really try to make your writers part of your marketing team for this, because it really will help your pieces become better and more targeted.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So until now, we've figured out what kind of angle you should create for the piece. And we've talked about the competitive landscape and the audience. And so now it's time to actually put together a brief. And so in the briefs can be small, long. I've seen everything with briefs, but the most important things that I think briefs should include would be the search intent. And so you can identify the search intent by basically just Googling your keyword and seeing what types of content is already ranking. That's a really good clue for how you can determine what type of what reason people are searching for the keyword, or using a tool. Most content teams have tools that tell them the search intent right away. Semrush is one of those. It'll just tell you whether people are looking for an informational blog post, or if they want to buy something and they want more of a sales page or a landing page. In that case, you wouldn't be writing content for it anyways. But yeah, including the search intent's important. Kind of a general word count. So how much you want the writer to, what kind of bucket you want the writer to stay in. Again, the keywords and the secondary keywords, very basic information, but the target audience, which we talked about, a call to action. So what do you want the reader to do after they finish reading your article, and potential SME. So if you want the writer to go out and find them themselves, you can let them know. Or if you have internal SME, I would include that right in the brief so that the writer can just pull from that really easily. And then lastly, what I find really helpful is including potential customer quotes and testimonials. So if you have a document that you can link to within the brief that the writer can access, like a spreadsheet that just includes relevant customer quotes. Maybe they're from, you pick and pull them from case studies, or their reviews that you have just added all into one document. This way the reader can just go into the document, and if they want to add some social proof into the piece, it's really easy for them to do. And by including this in the brief, you're essentially giving them liberty to do that. If you don't do that, they likely won't, because it's not something that is common. I don't find this is something that including customer quotes and testimonials isn't necessarily something a writer will go and do themselves unless they're asked to. And so that can be a very easy way to just incorporate social proof into like those bottom of the funnel pieces or the middle of the funnel. And just making sure your writer knows that they have liberty to do that.
Yeah, I was thinking of things I couldn't find, couldn't think of anything. But the general idea is the more detailed, the better, right?
Yeah. To an extent, I think there can be a point where briefs get too prescriptive, and maybe at that time, then the writer loses a bit of their ability to be creative within the writing process. I think the way to figure that out is just to talk to your writers when you're first putting together your briefs and ask them how they felt about the brief. And they'll be honest and let you know, like, oh, it told me too much what to do. And then I felt like I was, kind of backed into a corner. So yeah, just talk to your writers and see what they liked and what they didn't like, or what maybe they need more from your brief. But otherwise, yeah, it is good to have a detailed brief.
Makes sense. Good.
Yes. Sorry.
What's next?
So after you have your brief all put together, it's time to write the piece. Now, whether you have someone writing it for you or you're writing it, one strategy that I find is very helpful to increase readability is called BLUF. And so BLUF stands for bottom line upfront. And essentially what it means is that in every section, the first sentence is basically what gives the information to the reader. It's the most important information right up front. It helps people who are scanning your articles, because we all know that very few people will read your pieces from top to bottom. And so you want to essentially play into that, because you want people to read your articles and you want people to get information from your articles, but it's very hard to do that when people are just simply scanning through the piece. And so one way to combat that is through this BLUF strategy. And so you're going to give the reader the most important information as the first sentence so that they can get the information that they need. And from there, they can make the decision if they want to continue reading to learn the sort of the supporting evidence for what you're saying. And now it can be really helpful because once they get their information, they kind of do want to learn more as they're reading. And so it can be a way to increase readership as well on your blogs. I think maybe though BLUF is best explained through an example. So it's okay to share my screen.
Sure.
I will show. Okay, right here. So this is a piece that I wrote for Semrush, and it is about psychographic segmentation. And if you scroll through this section is why is psychographic segmentation useful? And the first sentence right here, psychographic market segmentation helps you create detailed buyer personas, and then in brackets just explains a fictional profile of your ideal customer. So that right there is BLUF, because it kind of gives a quick overview of what we're about to talk about. It gives them a quick benefit of why psychographic segmentation is useful, but we can see BLUF in action again if we go to the next section. So we're talking about how it improves messaging here. And then again, this sentence reads, understanding consumer interests helps you improve your messaging, like the copy for your ads or the content in your blog posts. And so this next part here, for example, we follow that information up with an example. If someone's scanning through this, they can read that first sentence in every section and get valuable information without having to sort of wade through the entire post. So it's a very user-friendly way of writing and can help your readers just gain more information from the content that you're creating. Now let's okay, stop that there. Perfect.
Yeah, makes sense. I somehow a couple of years back I heard about this and I thought, no way, I want to keep people on my blog. If I say, the punchline in the beginning, they'll leave. Apparently not. That's the opposite.
Yeah. So for content like blog articles, I find that BLUF works exceptionally well. If you're writing a script for video, I think it's better to have a hook and then sort of draw people in to try and encourage them to watch the video and maybe include some information throughout. Same with ads, sales pages. In those types of situations where you're writing more copy, you're trying to sell more, it's better to sort of build that interest, build intrigue rather than give everything away up front. But if you're writing informational content, then BLUF is a fantastic strategy.
Backed by data, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting because it's counterintuitive. So it's good to have it backed by data because it's better to say, that's just how it is.
Yeah, and another thing too that companies can do is, if they are hesitant to try and approach like that, write two versions of your blog post and test them against one another and see, use one with BLUF and use one without BLUF and see how your readers react to it. Are they spending more time going through the one that uses BLUF that actually gives them the information, or are they bouncing and not reading it? Because it could be just a certain audience prefers that style. Yeah. So it's always good to test with your own readers as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Okay, so we did BLUF. Another thing, with your blog content, you obviously want to be displaying your product and featuring your product throughout, and it can be difficult to do that in a way that actually benefits the reader, without sounding overly promotional. And so one thing that is useful is to, when you're mentioning your product, don't just mention the product and then leave it up to that, because the reader will have a hard time understanding how your product actually fits into the narrative that you're discussing. And so I would recommend showing workflows of your product. I'll share my screen again to show an example of a workflow. Okay, so here's a place in this article. This article is about how to build a custom 404 page in WordPress. And then at the end of the article, we talk about how to check your website for 404 errors to understand where those errors could be happening. It's relevant to the article. It's something the reader would want to know. And so we use Semrush's site audit tool, and we talk about how you can use the tool to check your site for 404 errors. So we don't just say that you can use the site audit and leave it at that. If you notice, we have a full step-by-step walkthrough here so that the reader can actually read the article and have the article open alongside if they wanted to try it out themselves. It just really encourages them to test it out so that they can follow the article as they're reading it and go through every step to find these 404 errors. And so whenever you can, try to include, a simple walkthrough that the reader can follow along with, because they'll be more likely to see how your product actually fits into how it can help them with what they're trying to achieve when they can see it in action. And it might be more likely to make them follow through on that and sign up and use your product.
Yeah, this is really good. And especially for the person who's responsible for, proving that content brings in revenue. This directly impacts, the conversion rate of the articles. So I think this is essential, really.
Yeah.
So it's great.
Yep. Anything else?
No, I think there's a way to do it where it's not too, blatant.
Yeah. It needs to really be relevant with what you're talking about. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Yeah. So I guess okay, let's talk about the conclusion of articles. Conclusions can be tricky because by the end, you're kind of like, okay, what am I going to write now? And so a lot of companies, they just use their conclusion to sort of summarize everything. And if a reader has got to the end of your article, if they have read everything, a summary really isn't super valuable at that point. They've read everything, and so they don't need a summary. And another way to approach your conclusion is if you're finding that it's not really if you're not really happy with how it's performing or its purpose in your piece, is to give the reader something of value. So that could be a free trial to your product, which is something that a lot of companies do. You can sort of scrap the conclusion. Like, I don't mean scrap it all together, but here's a conclusion I can share that I really like from Animals. Something they've done, instead of having a traditional conclusion, they have sort of a, so what should I do? And so this piece, just go all the way up here, it is about how ChatGTP will affect SEO. And so they go through and they list some different theories, what they think will happen. And then instead of having a conclusion that summarizes all of their thoughts and what ChatGTP will do to SEO, they give the reader some tips. And so it's not a huge section. It's sort of your standard conclusion, but it's more actionable for the reader. So I think just trying to ask yourself, what is something actionable that we can give the reader, something that would be valuable to them, rather than just a summary of what they've already read.
Yeah, what I like about that, and what it made me think of is it probably is piece to each piece. So what would be, maybe the next step for someone reading this article?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. The next step. That's a perfect way to look at it.
right. Yes.
Yeah. And so just trying to identify that even when you're going through the briefing process. So before you start to write the pieces, what is the next step that we want the reader to take after going through something like this? What is the big aha moment or the so what for them? And how can we sort of angle our conclusion in that way? Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, right. Yes, because most of them are, summaries. And so I think you need a conclusion. It's just, it has a beginning, and then you have to end somewhere. You cannot just end mid content. You have to make a closing statement of sorts.
Exactly.
But you can definitely use it better than a summary.
Yes. And talking about summaries, actually, what I've noticed companies have started doing, and I'm a big fan of this, is instead of having a summary at the bottom, have a summary at the top of your article, sort of like a too long didn't read. And so the reader can it's the same thing as BLUF again. The reader can get sort of a high level and they can get it all at the top of the article, but have jump links for each piece so that they can click to where they want to go within the piece. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you're trying to just make a piece that is highly readable and highly relevant for the reader. So that's another thing that you can experiment with when you're putting your content together, is instead of thinking of the conclusion as a summary, actually having a summary at the top that serves as a too long didn't read type section. Yeah.
Makes
So
sense.
after the piece has been completely written, then it's time for the editors to come in and kind of check everything. Fact checking is an important part of the process now. And especially with AI, if you are incorporating AI into the process, fact checking is very important. I work with some teams who have a dedicated fact checker. Some teams roll that role into the editors, kind of the editor's duties. I think when you need a fact checker is when you are working with a very complex topic, and that's when it can be very important to have someone who is just dedicated to fact checking. If it's a simple article that you can read through it yourself and identify if there's any mis or disinformation in it, then that's fine. But if it's a complex topic, then I think having a dedicated fact checker is going to be very valuable, just to check through everything. And they're not looking for edits at all. They're just looking for facts.
And this would be, like you say, for more complicated articles that are maybe that require some deeper subject matter expertise, maybe.
Yeah. For an example, I wrote a piece and it was on HT access files. So it's kind of a complicated topic for beginners. It was for beginners. And it's one of those topics where if I were to have written something incorrect in the piece and someone were to have followed my advice or follow my code, it could bring down their entire website. And so, yeah, so for that piece, I requested that we have a fact checker who was very technical, just because I did not want there to be anything in the piece that could, bring someone's website down. So that's a piece where a fact checker was very important. I'm trying to think. This psychographics in marketing piece that I showed a few minutes ago, that one wouldn't have been a piece where I had felt we would have needed a, a fact checker, because I can check the facts as I'm going myself. It's something I'm familiar with. And so those are two examples where one, a fact checker was needed, and one, I didn't feel one was like a dedicated fact checker would have been needed.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. Good one.
Yeah. And so I think too with the fact checkers, depending on what the topic is, you might be able to rely on someone within your organization, depending on what the topic is. So you can, if cross collaboration with teams is possible, have someone from a different team take a look, and make sure that make sure that the information is correct. And that can also be a way to just make sure you get more buy-in for the content you're creating, and keeping everyone on the same page.
Right. In your HT-Access example, maybe like a developer or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. If this applies to you, you will probably relate to some of these issues. I have not personally, I have not come across this where I have needed, but it's definitely, it sounds like some cases
Yeah,
require
there's
it.
some cases. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then typically I would say one to two rounds of reviews is standard. I think any more than that, and you might want to take a look at your brief to see why you're needing so many rounds of revisions and rounds of reviews. Um, I would say that could also be, yeah, that's definitely a red flag to know that your briefing process maybe isn't as strong as it could be if you are needing multiple rounds of revisions every time a piece crosses your desk.
What should an editor's comments mostly be about? Or let's say, what are the, how do I say this? Making sure you cover, the most important things, and then the editor just works on the details, rather than, the editor saying, completely rewrite this because you missed our
Yeah,
target audience. This is not a target audience, or
right.
what thoughts you have on that?
So that can be approached in two ways. One is that your brief includes your suggested outline for the piece. So you can also include a bit of an outline. I see that happen sometimes, not always. Or you can ask the writers to come back with an outline before they start writing the piece. And so that's when you can make sure that the structure of the piece is going to fit the audience properly and fit the topic properly. And then as for the editors, I think their main job is, well, obviously spelling and grammar, sort of these line edits, but also since your editors are likely coming at the piece with fresh eyes, as the writer, you've been in the piece for hours and days, and everything feels, you're kind of looking at it up close. And when your editors come in, they're taking a much farther look from the piece, and they're able to identify more easily the areas that are causing them confusion as they're reading through the piece, the areas that might cause the readers confusion. And so I think they should really be also looking at areas that are confusing to them, areas that need more explanation, or areas that you need to do a bit deeper of a dive in. Because I just find personally, as when I'm writing pieces, I can get so into the topic that it's harder to pull myself back and try to identify those areas. And so when I write, I like to space my writing out. I'll finish the piece and then I'll give myself 2 days and I'll come back and read it. And that can help me zoom out and identify all of those areas that are confusing and then fix those up. So I think as an editor coming in with a totally fresh perspective, that's their benefit, is they can really see, they can kind of fine tune everything and make sure that it's very easy to understand for the reader.
Right. Yeah, I have also written, and it's totally true. Where you are just too close to the
Yeah,
article, and you cannot see it being written any other way than what you have already written it. It's
you need that space for sure, or just a different perspective.
right. Cool. Do we have anything else?
No, I think we covered everything. Yeah, I think we covered everything in here. Just looking at my document. Looks good.
Okay, I guess we can end. Do you have just randomly off the top of your mind, any final, great idea to share?
Um,
So, in the think of the best performing articles you've written
mhm.
lately. If you could say, one thing that was a commonality shared among them, what would it be?
I think, um, well, there's a couple quick things. One, they're very highly relevant to the reader and their needs, and so it's just important to understand your readers, what their challenges are. It just really helps you speak to them and understand what they're going through and build more empathy through the content that you post. Just being very empathetic to their situation and what they're going through can really make a reader feel like they're understood and make them want to read more. If they don't feel like you understand where they're coming from, there'll be a major disconnect between the two of you and they'll bounce and go somewhere else. So it's just finding that balance of, yeah, understanding what they're going through and trying to highlight your offer in a way that makes them feel like they're still understood and not being sold to. And then just creating relevant content. So again, that does go back to understanding the reader and their needs and creating something that meets them where they are in their buyer's journey. So just highly relevant, highly relatable content is what it boils down to.
Nice.
Yeah.
Crop that into a short clip and blast it on
Awesome.
social.
I'm glad I came up with it.
All right,
Cool. Well, that was
let's
fun.
end this. Thanks a lot. Oh, also, we can end. You obviously offer writing services for
Mhm.
B2B SaaS. Do you have any client spot open right now? Are you fully booked? Where can people reach out? Things like this.
I'm pretty booked right now, but it kind of changes from time to time. So if I would love to chat if you have a project that you wanted to work on. My website is dananicoledesigns.com. Because I used to do designs, so that's why everyone asks. Anyways, yeah, dananicoledesigns.com, and I would love to connect even on LinkedIn. Just send me a message, send me a request, and yeah, it would be nice to connect with everyone.
Nice. Perfect. All right. Let's close
Awesome.
this.